Tonight, media bias in the spotlight. As the world mourns the loss of 5 lost in the deep Atlantic. And Meta's response to Canada's Online Bills Act. And later in the show, an insightful discussion on how to be an anti-racist at the workplace and in our community.
Oftentimes, this work can be very academic. We're using language and using theories that often don't connect with people and community.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Muslim News Canada on Muslim Network TV. I am Samia Sayed. Meta has announced it will end Canadian access to news stories on Facebook and Instagram. The news comes after the Canadian government introduced Bill C-18, or the Online News Act. The act demands mega giants like Facebook and Google pay revenue to media houses for sharing news content from other companies. The Canadian House of Commons and the Senate have passed the bill, and as soon as it receives royal assent, it will be enacted. Both Meta and Google have criticized the bill. Meta had previously warned that it would stop carrying news if the bill came into effect. A media source reports Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez is in talks with Google to stop it from following Meta's example. Former U.S. President Barack Obama is slamming the hypocrisy of Western media concerning migrants. He said giving more attention to a submersible carrying 5 people than the migrant boat sinking off Greece with up to 700 people is, quote, rotten. Obama is in Greece for a conference. His comments come when 2 sinking incidents in Canada and Greece captured the world's attention. The submersible incident was given worldwide coverage. The US and Canadian government deployed special search units in the Atlantic Ocean to ensure the safety of 5 billionaires who were on board the submersible. On the other hand, a faulty fishing boat carrying more than 700 people that sank near Greek shores did not receive much attention. Those on board were migrants fleeing violence and persecution. Many of them drowned. Obama said the submersible tragedy is getting minute-to-minute coverage all around the world. He says the notion that we can't do something about migrants is simply not true. He says we know we can do things for these people. Obama is referring to the migrant flow to Western countries. The Prince Edward Island government has unveiled its new anti-racism plan. The 5-year plan will help the province reach its goal of eliminating systemic racism and to promote diversity. It is also creating a new anti-racism office to align with its objectives. The plan was introduced to the PEI's Legislative Assembly on Wednesday and is based on 3 points. These include inclusive community cohesion, BIPOC advancement, and legislation and policy review. Please stay tuned and we'll be back after a short break. Now, in recent years, we have seen lots of efforts of people speaking up against inequality, all the while sharing their story of themselves and their community to change a pre-existing and harmful narrative. Salam Deb is an anti-racism course creator, educator, and social justice advocate. And she's joining us today to tell us more about herself and her work in dismantling the systems of privilege and relearning that narrative. Welcome to the show, Salam, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Before I jump into all the great work you're doing, I want to hear about you. How did you get involved in a work such as anti-racism, education, and advocacy?
Well, as a Black Ethiopian woman, I grew up here in Canada. 2 immigrant parents who came here in the 1980s who really went through a lot of the experiences that many of us as immigrants have experienced here in Canada, which was systemic racism, growing up in disinvested communities, not having access, being streamlined in education system, and all the ways in which I went through those barriers, which led me eventually to teaching anti-racism through my own lived experience.
Mhm. Now, you offer a wide variety of resources on your site, some of which are some free guides. Can you tell me more about them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the free guide. So, for example, the first one would be the anti-racism guide. The anti-racism guide, really teaches folks how to build an anti-racist lens and how to start to move away from being, not racist to being anti-racist. I also have guides on, 10 ways that white women can dismantle white supremacy. So it talks about the ways in which often feminism shows up in harmful ways, bourgeois or mainstream feminism in the ways in which we understand gender equity, and the ways in which often Black, Indigenous, and racialized women and girls, our experiences are often dismissed when we talk about gender equity. And then the last one about microaggressions, because I think many of us, oftentimes we talk about systemic racism, but we don't realize that on a daily basis, we're often experiencing racism within the workspace, with our colleagues, within community. And so that last guide really teaches on what it looks like to address and acknowledge how microaggressions operates.
Mhm. Now, usually when we say the word guides, sometimes it will include, actually, most of the time, it'll include academic research and things like that. But what I liked about your resource is that you include more tangible methods and strategies and real life methods that we can employ. So I'm wondering, how did you go about, writing these resource guides and putting them together?
Well, I agree with you that oftentimes this work can be very academic. We're using language and using theories that often don't connect with people in community. I wanted the guides to be accessible. I want people to be able to read them and feel impacted because, my experience of, not having access to education, higher education, having to really survive in many ways through these systems, I felt that I could offer a more emotional, more honest, more authentic, and more just accessible way of like learning and unlearning that not only teaches white folks on how to do better, but also helps us as Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks and Muslim folks, to really understand our lived experiences and be able to put name to it and feel validated.
Mhm. I love that. And you are also offering an anti-racism course. So once people enroll in such a course, what should they be able to walk away knowing?
Well, the anti-racism course is like 6 modules. And so within those 6 modules, we talk about first Canada's colonial history. So really starting from the foundation, because we can't really understand how we got to where we are until we understand the history of this country, which has often been erased when we think about it not being taught in the education system. So the fact that there was 250 years of enslavement here in so-called Canada, that there is the impacts of racist immigration policies that impact us. And then it goes on to talk about the ways in which whiteness operates, white supremacy. It goes on to talk about systemic racism, how to be an ally, and all of the ways in which we can show up to become an anti-racist. But it takes you along a journey of reflection, of journaling, of watching videos of me speaking, and really helps folks to self-examine and really start to build the tools on how you can start to be actively anti-racist.
Mhm. So you said it's meant to help people self-examine, but who are these people that should be enrolling in such a course?
Well, oftentimes, obviously, this work is targeted often to white folks to start to build that awareness to those who are not Black, Indigenous, racialized, Muslim, and so forth. However, it's also for us, for Black, Indigenous, and racialized people and Muslim people, for us to start to build that awareness within ourselves on how internalized racism shows up. For white folks, it's to help them recognize how they've colluded, how they are, benefiting from a racist society. And then for us as Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks, it's for us to learn how to reclaim often what's been stolen, whether it be language, whether it be culture, whether it be the ways in which we have that internalized racism where we start to believe that we're unworthy and so forth, and we believe the stereotypes. So it's for all groups really to start to build that sense of awareness.
Mhm. And I love that, as you said, Canada has this reputation of being multicultural, tolerant, and so on. And in many respects it is, but there's also some aspects of it that we have to clearly point and pick apart and say, that this was not right and it happened in Canada. But if you can teach one tangible skill to our viewers tonight, and if we start with the basics, how can someone be an anti-racist?
Well, I think firstly, it is to move away from this idea of not being racist, this idea and concept that we are colorblind and we should just all love each other and kumbaya and everyone is the same. That's not the truth and that's not the reality. So we need to start from the fact that we do have differences. There is whiteness, we are Black, we are Indigenous, we are racialized, we are Muslim, we're all different types of peoples. And we need to acknowledge that and then recognize that there are barriers that impact groups of people. And we need to start to learn about it. Take the time and invest to take a course to learn from an educator in anti-racism and equity and start to invest that time and energy. And I think it has to start there. We need to do that unlearning process in order for us to change, the kind of racist, unconscious bias, but really code for racism that impacts all of us.
Mhm. Now, on the topic of anti-racism, I know one common critique is that in this whole process, terms like equity, diversity, inclusion, tolerance, they become almost buzzwords. Does
Mhm.
that tie into what you were saying before? I mean, how do we move beyond just name dropping these terms and actually living by them?
Absolutely. I talk about that all the time, which is, we have to really begin to examine what we mean by diversity, because even when we say the term diversity, what we often mean is we're looking at whiteness as the benchmark, the universal benchmark, human standard, and then we're measuring everything by that benchmark, that human standard. When we're talking about inclusion, we have to really examine that, because what do we mean by inclusion? As Angela Davis said, I don't want to be included into an inherently racist society. So are systems and structures and organizations changing? And are they actually looking at how power dynamics show up? We need to move beyond those buzzwords and we need actual tangible change. And tangible change happens when there's a redistribution of power, when we're beginning to address the dominant culture, which in many ways is whiteness and the standard that we're all being measured by. And we begin to really move away from this idea that Canada is different than the US or that we're better in some way, and recognize this country's history of, genocide towards Indigenous peoples, racist immigration policies, enslavement of Black people, harm and violence towards Japanese people, Chinese people, Muslim people. We know that the rise of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate is high. And so we need to look and address it in a real way instead of using coded language.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Salam, and sharing more about your commendable work, and all the best with your course.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Muslim News Canada. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, a gentle reminder that Sound Vision that produces our news is a not-for-profit organization, and we can use your support through donations. Please visit www.muslimnetwork.tv to help us continue to amplify the voices of Muslims in Canada and abroad.